And when you search up real vampirism, he's one of the first people that come up. I wanted to get fangs made by him. It was exhilarating. It was cathartic. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel so alone. I finally found people who spoke my language. I started noticing him emphasizing the importance of sex magic, how powerful it is, and beginning to kind of talk about his romantic conquests. And the conversation shifted from what I would consider to be an appropriate mentor-mentee relationship. Something in the back of my head told me that this was not worth it and that it was going to get a lot worse. And I just didn't listen. He had a kink to dress women up like dolls, and that he expects every woman who he dates to be dressed by him. I don't believe that it was just women that he exploited. I was invited to a kink party by Sebastian. When we arrived, he used my collar and my sign of submission to assault me publicly.
Oh my gosh.
There was this idea of wanting to kind of own me.
Mine is the only voice.
Wow.
What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey guys, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations or people and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening on those podcast platforms and you would prefer to see our faces, go on over to YouTube at Cults to Consciousness. The very best way to support our show is interacting with the post, liking, sharing, commenting, leaving those words of encouragement for our guests who are bravely stepping forward, sharing their stories. They are real people, sharing some of the more darker parts of their life. And so it means so much to them when you can support them in the comments. So today's guest, I was thrilled to be contacted by her through Instagram. We are getting into the Father Sebastian vampire cult once again. This time we are speaking with someone who did meet him and wanted a student-teacher relationship and felt that she was coerced and groomed into something more romantic, and basically her struggles of trying to set those boundaries and eventually get out of the community altogether. So thank you so much for joining us, Ashra.
Thank you for having me. This is definitely a difficult topic to discuss and something I've been going back and forth on for some time, but I'm glad to finally have a safe space and platform to share my story.
Yeah, so this is the first time that you're sharing publicly about this.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, this is definitely a big deal, and I want to make sure that you feel safe and comfortable, so you can guide the conversation as well. If something comes up that you don't want to talk about, feel free to scooch us in a different direction. We're here for you, and we want to make sure that you get everything out that you are wanting to. I know we have quite an exhaustive list of things that we want to discuss. And so let's just dive into it then. Let's talk a little bit about your upbringing so we can have some context as to how you ended up with Sebastian in his orbit.
So to start out, born and raised in Southern California. I grew up in a Catholic family where I felt like the black sheep. It was never something that I felt really resonated for me. From a young age, I consider myself to be a medium. I had a lot of experiences of having past life regressions, feeling like I don't really necessarily belong in this time period, and really struggling to hold those two opposing beliefs at the same time.
So you felt like your family was religious and that didn't resonate with you?
Yeah. I went to Mass every week. I was baptized. I got my first communion, and something just never really felt right about it to me. There was a lot of discrepancies in my own personal morals, and I tend to be a little bit of a know-it-all, so noticing some of the holes in the plot and learning about the Bible really bothered me. And so I was kind of in a place where I was told that until I'm 18 years old, I'm Catholic, while also having my own private practice where I connected to spirits from a young age. And I was just attracted to the world of spirituality and occult from a very young age. But it was my own private, kind of quiet thing that was for me.
I can definitely relate to that. Growing up Mormon, we weren't even allowed to tell ghost stories, or we weren't supposed to, or watch any sort of scary movies because they said they brought the devil in. But it's interesting that coming from Catholicism, there is very much the lore of demons and Satan and the boogeyman type of thing. Did you find that that kind of coincided with your personal beliefs of the spiritual?
I felt like it was a very reductionistic mentality of this like black and white good versus evil. I just really struggled with resonating with the messaging I was being taught while simultaneously being introduced to ritual through mass, which I found to be, I found hypocrisy in it.
That makes sense. So, did you have anyone guiding you through this new practice that you mentioned, this private practice, or were there people whose books you were reading on it, or you were just trying to figure it out yourself?
I was mostly solitary starting out. I was like that kid that was 6, 7 years old, inviting my friends over for sleepovers and then being like, hey guys, we're going to do a seance. And it was just like, it was something that was in my bones. And I don't really know how to perfectly articulate that. But later down the line, I was introduced to green magic and Wicca through a family friend, and I read a few books more oriented towards green magic and kind of fell in love and found a sense of home and belonging in that.
I've never heard of green magic. Can you explain what it is?
Yeah, so it's kind of, I would almost say there's an emphasis and connection to nature and a worship of nature in my practice when I was younger, and I still do this. There's a lot of use of burning herbs and a lot of connection to the earth and the elements and focusing your energy towards your connection with that and fostering that connection.
Is it similar in any way to paganism or indigenous practices? Because it sounds similar as far as being connected in one with nature.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that in a lot of ways, green magic does fall under the umbrella of paganism. It doesn't always, but for a lot of people that I've met who are more like pagan leaning, that's something that they integrate into their practice.
Did your mom know that you were doing this stuff?
Yes and no. There was like an element of her turning a blind eye a little bit and moments that kind of contradicted each other where she would be very fascinated in what I was doing. Like I think 6 years old, asked her for wall sconces for candles. I was obsessed with burning incense. And she didn't really like demonize those practices. And yet at the same time, there was the expectation that on the outside I looked and aligned with Catholic values.
Was there anything else from your childhood that you feel like is relevant to your story later on with vampirism and Sebastian?
Absolutely. I grew up in a very complicated household. There were a lot of secrets. It was an environment where there was a general understanding of there was a thing being said, and then there was subtext. I now know as an adult, after having gone through a lot of therapy, that I suffered from complex trauma from various factors in my childhood, which I think really shaped my, I guess, predisposition to joining something like a cult.
So, something that left you a more vulnerable target.
Yes, at least I can speak from my own experience in this that repeated exposure to people who maybe have certain traits of abuse makes you more susceptible to repeating those patterns because it's what you know. Even though you might know, part of you knows that it's wrong, there's almost a sense of home in that feeling.
Yeah. And that's incredibly common. We see that all the time. Same thing happened to me and I didn't even realize it was happening. It's just this unconscious cycle that keeps repeating itself until you can recognize it and break from it. And then for me, it was accepting the love I knew I deserved because that's usually what it is. You accept the love you think you deserve. And if in childhood years, those early years, your brain is wired to believe that you are only worth so much or that people don't love you or have to do these things for people to love you, then that's going to carry on throughout your adult life.
Absolutely. I recently began my journey as a grad student studying clinical psychology, and I can tell you from a developmental standpoint, repeated exposure to certain individuals that model the same like attachment style, if you will, to your primary caregivers really does feel like home. And it's a pattern that so many of us get stuck in until we finally kind of have that personal alchemical process where we're able to break free. And it's almost impossible to do alone.
So we have a professional here. I don't have to tell you. You already know. You can teach me something. And I know that was part of your deconstruction journey when you were going to school and you're like, "Oh, wait a second. Now I can recognize these patterns and manipulation tactics and coercive control that were happening and kind of unwind all of that programming." So, is now a good time to jump into when you met Sebastian or when you were seeking out the vampire community?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess like backtracking a little bit, my fascination with vampirism started pretty young. I think I was maybe 12 years old when I was like on Google being like, how to transform into a vampire, which is a very like 12-year-old thing to do after reading the Twilight Saga.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that that was kind of the turning point for me where I was just fascinated. Later down the line, I got more into more occult practices that are more complicated, involving more like ritualistic magic and just a bit more complexity that isn't solely based on intuition. This led me to learning about practicing vampirism. Through starting to get into that, I then came across Father Sebastian because, again, when you search up, vampirism, real vampirism, he's one of the first people that come up. And from that point, I decided that I wanted to get fangs made by him. I went ahead and set up that appointment, and it kind of evolved very quickly from that point.
For those who aren't familiar and haven't seen our other previous interviews, can you explain what the vampire lifestyle is?
Yeah, so there are different levels to the involvement in the vampire lifestyle. For some people, it's almost like LARPing. They dress up, talk the talk, if you will, and they just enjoy being around other people who enjoy embodying this archetype of the vampire. And it doesn't go deeper than that. For other people, there's a religious part of it or a spiritual part of it where there is an integration of energy work and ritual. I think that mainstream media is very aware of a more like a colloquial term of energy vampire, and there's such a negative connotation tied to that. The vampiric practice is not someone unconsciously siphoning energy from someone with ill intent. Sometimes there's ill intent, of course, there's exceptions to the rule, but I would say akin to other energy practices like Reiki or other various methods of energy exchange. In this instance, it's the more conscious choice to pull energy from sometimes people, sometimes places. For me personally, I tend to pull more from nature. I pull from moon energy, from the earth, from the trees, the area around me. And it's different for everyone, but in the most basic sense, it is the pulling in and exchange of energy with the people around you or big crowds in order to fuel your will, and your will being something that you develop over time. Like, say, it's it has some similarities to Buddhist practice where the ultimate goal is quote unquote nirvana. This feeding is a method within the vampire belief system to achieve that.
Okay. And then when it comes to the Hollywood biting of the neck and sucking blood, can you talk about that form of vampirism as you may have experienced it or others do practice it?
I would say on the outside, it is a pretty big taboo. A lot of people believe it to be one, unnecessary, and two, a little bit unethical to an extent. And also, there's the safety aspect. There are still some who do engage in sanguine feeding, which is what drinking blood is referred to, but it's a more like hush hush topic. It's not something that is readily discussed in more public discord or even with the outer sanctum, if you will, of the group and of the practice.
Okay. Yeah, and we can circle back to this once we get more into Father Sebastian. So, going back to where we are in your story, you seek him out because you want these things and you want to engage in a mentor mentee type of relationship. So, what is that first meeting with Sebastian like? What are your perceptions of him? How do you feel like he can uplift you and or your practice?
Honestly, it took me a long time to get to the point where I wanted to reach out to somebody else in the occultist community. I was solitary for years because of the fear of abuse. It's obviously not a universal experience within like spiritual occultist culture, but it's something that I had heard of frequently and I didn't want to fall into that trap. After a while, it gets kind of lonely being the only person in your zip code who has this practice. So when I first met him, he was making fangs outside or inside of an occultist shop, or rather an oddity shop. My first impression of him when I saw him was, whoa, this guy is unique. From what I remember, he had this very interesting stare to him that was almost magnetizing. I remember being so excited to have someone to just talk about occultism with. He seemed very fascinated by me and what I was sharing in my practice as a demonologer. He asked me if I wanted to get coffee after he made my fangs. And of course, I was like a little bit starstruck and I said yes. And that was when he kind of started explaining more of the vampire community and I started getting invited by him to events.
Okay, so you're 22 years old and now you're in this circle of other people who express the same interests as you, which up until this point, you had just mentioned that you were pretty much isolated within that. So this must have felt pretty exciting to jump into this world.
It was exhilarating. It was cathartic. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel so alone in my belief system and in my spirituality. And I felt like I finally found people who spoke my language, which made it just absolutely intoxicating.
Yeah, I can imagine that just feeling a sense of community and a sense of non judgment, probably for something that you held really close to you. What was that experience like moving into a relationship of mentor mentee? What was he actually teaching you, or what were you supposed to be learning?
Our mentor mentee relationship started out on a really fun note. I was being introduced to people in the community who had status. He kind of rolled out the red carpet, if you will, in these introductions and in the events that I was going to that were, exclusive or what have you. At first, it was just him asking me if I understood the basics of vampirism, where I was at in my knowledge and filling in the gaps a little bit from his perspective on it. It, I guess, began to unravel a little bit when I started noticing him emphasizing the importance of sex magic and how powerful it is, and beginning to kind of talk about his romantic conquests. And the conversation shifted from what I would consider to be an appropriate mentor mentee relationship into something a little bit more, I guess, like the red flags were waving. And I, at the time, was ignoring them because it felt like I just gained the keys to the kingdom, if you will, in the way of having community for the first time, having a mentor for the first time. Despite what I considered to be his personal quirks, it felt worth it at that point in time.
Yeah, let's talk about that power imbalance. Let's talk about the age gap and how he used your willingness and excitement for the community to insert himself into your life in a way that you had not intended.
Yeah, so I mean, when I met him, like we've mentioned, I was 22 and he was 45 years old. I think that for me, there was this idea of seeing so many people around him who I considered to be these like safe people, obviously not naming names, but there were older women around him who had known him for years. There were other practitioners in the LA community who I assumed were safe people. And so, despite these kind of quirks, I had this false sense of safety. And I think that that was where a lot of justification came through for me.
I think that's a big thing, the safe by association, and I've experienced that in various contexts throughout my life, even with Mormonism. If they're Mormon, they're probably safe. Well, we know that that's not true. Or, I've had the same thing with another guru where I was introduced by someone who seemed like a safe person. I'm like, oh, well, everything's fine if she's doing it, so I'm probably fine too. And you just make these assumptions based on the testimony of those around you. That's not always the right way to go about it. And I think a lot of us who have left high control groups can now recognize, but it basically preys on our better judgment because we're like, oh, we want to assume that people have good intentions. We want to assume that everyone out there means well. And that's not always the case. And I feel like predators use that against us, knowing that we're people who give others the benefit of the doubt, or we're people who have a lot of empathy and genuinely want to help others. And that's often something that is preyed upon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the disillusionment began slowly. There was almost like this interesting cognitive dissonance going on where something in the back of my head told me that this was not worth it and that it was going to get a lot worse. And yet at the same time, having other people around him who were acting like everything was fine made me kind of question my own judgment and question my own reality,
Mhm.
which led to it taking a lot longer for me to leave. I think that was one of the hardest things, was building those relationships with these other people and trusting them, and then realizing that for whatever reason they're maybe enabling him, and I was not safe.
Yeah. I think it's a harder position to be in once you're in if you have ignored the red flags and not just missed the red flags, because I've been there where you see it and then you're like, "Oh, it's fine," or "No," and they find a way to talk you out of it, or, they're master manipulators so they can change a red flag into a green flag and you're like, "Oh, right, makes sense." And then when you're in it and you recognize it again and you're like, I saw the signs, but I I should've took off when I noticed it, but it's so hard not to blame yourself for something like that, and it is a common thing where all of the stars align in just a way to where you just ignore the things that you should have been paying attention to, and the reason I'm calling that out is because I think it's important for listeners who have never been in a situation like that to remember and recognize how this can work and how a situation can devolve so quickly instead of just saying, I would never fall for that. you know, that's one of the worst pet peeves that I have is when people say that to cult survivors, people who've been through something really difficult and traumatic, because it just everything has to line up in such a way, and we do feel dumb enough already. We don't need people on the outside being like, "Oh, please, how did you miss that red flag?" Well, sometimes, like you're saying, we do recognize things, but there are other circumstances that cause us to ignore them.
Absolutely. I think that it's so easy for someone who's never experienced something like this to say, oh, well, if I was in their shoes, I would simply do this. But you're not. And there's no way of truly knowing what decisions you would make until you were actually in that position.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the years I'm still processing this, the years that it takes to dismantle that internalized shame of
Yeah.
knowing that a part of you knows better, and yet you ignore that part of you and you self-abandon over and over again. It's hard to come to terms with, and at the same time, I think that people who've gone through this deserve a healthy amount of compassion in their process of kind of unraveling what even happened to them.
Yes, when you said self-abandon, that resonated so hard for me because that's what it is. When you ignore the red flags, you're abandoning your intuition, you're abandoning your identity, yourself, your morals, your standards, whatever it is. And so it takes years to get back to a place where you're like, okay, I picked up all the pieces of myself. I'm back together again, and now I can fully recognize where I went wrong. Whereas in the moment, it's just a little chip at a time, just takes a little piece of you, until when you're in the cult, you're so brainwashed into your new environment, your new surroundings, your new reality, that it's so hard to recognize that you've lost yourself. So let's talk about the ways in which you can recognize now you were devolving and that relationship with him was devolving into something darker.
Yeah, so the interesting part as you were saying that is I was thinking about how systematically that happened. Once I became involved in this community, I was expected to drop basically everything else. I had to give so much of my time out of the week, so much of my energy taking phone calls. I was entrenched in this world, and my world outside of everything that was Sebastian shrank and became less important because there was, again, that like intoxicating energy around it.
So you're saying that basically it started with isolation and hyper focus on this one person, which is, of course, really common. They cut you off from your friends and family by not just saying, you can't talk to them. They make it think it's your idea, right? And he probably did this knowing his personality after hearing about this man. It's probably, oh, they don't deserve your time and attention. They don't really understand you. We understand you. We're your family. Was it like that?
I think, yeah, to an extent. I think that in terms of my biological family, there wasn't a lot of support there to begin with. At the time, I was with my previous partner, and our relationship was devolving over time. And I think at the end of the day, I was very lonely. And so it was easy to give up these other parts of myself to this more glamorous and enticing, deeply interesting world.
And meanwhile, he's throwing things at you like sex magic and making you think that it's your idea to enter into this type of relationship with him when really he was grooming and coercing you into it.
Yeah, and another part of it that I have yet to mention is the normalization of non-monogamy in this space. And of course, this does not speak to non-monogamy as a whole. But for me, up until that point in my life, I had been strictly monogamous. I was in a long-term relationship, and there was almost this sort of energy of like, oh, like, you're monogamous? None of us are. Like, we have multiple partners. We don't, deal with this whole jealousy thing. Like, this is the way to be. And so I think I started doubting myself, and I was like, well, why am I closed off to that? Why is this problematic? Maybe it's a defect of my own and something I need to get over. So that was another aspect to that experience. There were more elements of these deep conversations where I was being told that we have some kind of past life connection. He's never felt this way about anyone before. A lot of like romantic leaning statements that at first were taking me kind of aback, but that line between magic and past life connection and romanticism began to become very blurred.
So he's using your belief system against you in one way or another. Whether you believe in regressions or not, I feel like using that as a way to manipulate you into a relationship is something that we've seen amongst many gurus, and it's extremely unethical.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And I remember when things kind of took a turn to full romanticism. It was New Year's Eve. I was at an exclusive occultist gathering. There was an interesting moment where I told him about a dream that I have. And again, I consider myself to be a medium. So a lot of times my dreams mean a lot to me. I won't get into like all of the details of it, but I witnessed women being locked in various rooms in various states of mental disarray, and that he locked them in there, and I was locked in a room as well. And this was when I didn't really know anything regarding allegations, anything regarding how he had treated women in the past. And I told him, and I was like, this was such an interesting dream. And I just remember him kind of looking at me wide eyed. And in that moment, I think I realized this is not good, but I don't want to give up what I've gained. And that's something that I still have a really hard time reconciling with, because some part of myself told me exactly what was happening, and I just didn't listen. And after that, it quickly devolved into what I would consider to be love bombing. I think around 2 weeks in, I remember him telling me that he was falling in love with me. That's something that I don't think is very typical to hear in a normal, courtship, if you will. The red flags, again, kept kind of getting dampened by this like frequent involvement, by having access to other people who think the way that I do and experience the world the way that I do. And so it's like it was so many little things over time until it became bigger things.
Yeah. One of the things I know we were going to discuss today is your perception of how he treated women and yourself. And I think that's a missing piece of the puzzle that we haven't heard so far. So I'm looking forward to your perspective on that.
Yeah, so I first recognized this with other women. Part of what I remember of the, I guess, pre-official courtship was being shown images of women that he had dated in the past or had a romantic sexual relationship in the past in various states of undress that I'm sure they would not have felt comfortable with him sharing.
Yeah.
And I felt weird about this, but my entire life I've been in the role of people's their personal therapist, the person that people feel comfortable to confide in. And so I thought maybe he was just lonely and didn't have people to talk to, and maybe just was not understanding social norms or overtures. When our courtship began, there was an expectation of what I wore, and I recall a moment when we had gone out to tea, and he confided in me that he had a kink to dress women up like dolls, and that he expects every woman who he dates to wear a certain type of shoe, which is basically like a black stripper shoe that are they're very uncomfortable. And for a lot of the events, he would send me pictures of things that he thought I would look good in and would like me to wear. At the time I did consent to this, I thought it was helpful for me, not having been in the space, to have some guidance on clothing. But it definitely crossed a line into various states of more nudity than I was comfortable with. And I can't speak for everyone who has had experiences with Sebastian, but I do know that I have witnessed a few different people kind of falling into that same category of being dressed by him.
So when we did our interview with Casa, she mentioned women being collared. Is that something that you had experience with?
Yes. So In Casa's interview, she discussed that she had collared someone herself in more of a reclamation of connecting us to our own power. I was the person that she had collared, which is why I keep it today, and I've sort of reclaimed what it means to me. I'm under the impression that that was not the case for many before me. I feel lucky to not have been subjected to things that I had heard about under those pretenses. It was not the same for me, but yes, I was collared.
Okay. That's good. It wasn't in the ownership type of collaring, it was more for empowerment.
There were ways in which control was exerted over me within the kink and BDSM community. It's normalized to use contracts in which people agree on what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with. In my experience, this contract was used against me and encouraged a lot of coercion and times when I said yes, and times when my nonverbal cues were definitely indicating that it was a no and were ignored.
Okay. Is this in the context with Father Sebastian or just with the community as a whole?
Just with Father Sebastian, I remember when I was 22 feeling lucky that I had his protection from other individuals in the community. And in a way, I think that it did gain me some level of skirting away from further traumatization, but now I don't necessarily see it that way.
I'm wondering within the specific group if people were sort of expected to go along with this sexual exploration or sexual liberation of, you had already mentioned that non-monogamy was kind of like, if you're not doing it, then you're not fitting in. And I know in Casa's interview, she mentioned that BDSM was something that was kind of going on behind the scenes as well. So I'm wondering if just the idea of being sexually liberated and having multiple partners was something that was sort of expected within this group.
I don't know about expected, but I did witness a trend where new people would come in and they were in monogamous relationships previously, and then all of a sudden they weren't. And that didn't necessarily mean they were involved with Father Sebastian, but it did mean that there was definitely a shift that happened. And I think that it was heavily normalized that having one partner would be unsatisfactory in terms of energetic feeding and in terms of having adequate connection.
Okay, so there was some underlying methodology or religious-based ideas that created that sort of environment.
In my perspective, I would agree with that statement. I'm not sure if everyone within the community would agree. I think that it was something that was heavily normalized and encouraged.
I guess speaking from my experience, I think it's common for religious groups, high control religious groups, to have some sort of ritual or secret ceremony or something that you don't get to until you're at the higher levels. And then once you get there, everyone's doing it and you feel pressured to partake, even if it goes against everything that you stand for, or if it goes, your red flags are going up and your alarms are going off and you're like, what is this? But you kind of feel like you need to go along with it because everyone else is. And if you don't, then you're going to be put on the outskirts of the group and maybe be looked at differently. And so through these interviews, I'm kind of seeing that that might be an undertone to the community, something that was maybe pushed onto people that they weren't necessarily going to be getting involved in if they weren't part of this group.
Yeah, I think there was a sense of people really wanting to be a part of that inner circle, and there were events for more of the public, and there were events that were more exclusive, where I think that people were more sussed out to see what level they were willing to go to or what they were comfortable with in terms of ritual and what that looked like, and the involvement of some more sensual elements.
Okay. So with this non-monogamy that he was, and I hate even using that term because I know that most people who are in that community practice it ethically, and everyone's consenting to what's going on, and I don't feel like that's the case here. I feel like he was using it as an excuse to just have a bunch of sexual partners, and no one was really okay with it, at least to my perspective. So was it hard for you to know that he was in other relationships simultaneously, or were you aware, or was he?
From what I remember, it was a very interesting experience where it was introduced as there's like a terminology called compersion, where the partner, like say myself, should experience happiness for Father Sebastian that he has a connection to another person.
Oh, that just makes my stomach turn, sorry. Just like, oh, I don't like that at all.
I do absolutely believe, in my perspective, that it was used as a front. I didn't throw the ethical in front of non-monogamy to specify that that was not what I would consider it to be.
Yeah.
I guess polyamory would be a better term to describe it, and even then, I'm not sure if it necessarily falls into that category very cleanly either. There were moments where I was promised that he would, you know, for lack of a better term, drop all of his other partners to be with me because I was the one for him. And he was like willing to do that. He would go oscillate very frequently between being polyamorous and monogamous. I'm not sure if he ever actually was monogamous, but that was what was communicated to me.
I feel like polygamous is a better term because you weren't able to have other relationships, were you?
I actually did. I entered
Okay.
the community with a long-term partner, and over time, with discussions with him, he agreed to open the relationship. I'm still kind of battling with the position that I put him in terms of that. And later down the line, it was kind of encouraged for me to end that relationship. And I didn't, but there was this idea of wanting m- me to himself, and I think wanting to kind of own me. Like there felt like there was a sense of ownership, and yeah, it didn't feel good.
Yeah. So now that we have a basic understanding of who he is and how you got involved, I think it's a good time to circle back around to the feeding practices and how we got there.
Okay, yeah. I took a few-year hiatus from being super involved with Father Sebastian and those around him. And when I returned, there was definitely involvement of sanguine feeding under the guise of him needing it to help heal his illness that he was and is dealing with.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know the illness part. So he was basically claiming victim or I need help or please help me and guilting you by using your good nature against you into doing something you weren't comfortable with.
Yeah, it was interesting when I returned in, I think, around 2024. I think Rachel had mentioned something about him struggling with an illness and being unsure if that was legitimate or not. From my experience, it did appear that way. There was a slippery slope again of boundaries and taking on a caretaker role for him as a result of his illness, which I think I genuinely do believe to be real, but weaponizing his illness to cross boundaries methodically, but in a more rapid pace was something that I dealt with.
Okay. Is that what drew you back in after leaving for a few years?
I think in part it was a very complicated reason why I returned. It was kind of an amalgamation of reasons. In part, I went to dinner with him one night and he disclosed to me that he was struggling with an illness that was pretty serious. And honestly, part of my brain thought, well, if he's ill, he can't exert control over me to the same extent he used to. So maybe it's safe. And other parts that contributed to that was that I was lonely again. I didn't have community. When I left, I left. I was in a really difficult place in my life where I was in the midst of another relationship ending that was very emotionally volatile.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in a really vulnerable space.
Okay, so you go back, and to bring it back to the sanguinarism, he basically said that he needed your blood to heal his illness?
Yeah, it happened, I think, a few different times. It wasn't like constant. But he would tell me afterwards every time how much it helped him. I re-entered under the premise that I want to have a mentor-mentee relationship and friendship, and that's what I'm comfortable with. He would ask me to hold his hand to hide his symptoms of his illness. And I'm sure, I mean, this is just conjecture, but I'm sure to others it appeared that we were involved again. And that was not the case for me, at least at the time.
Do you think he had other motives and other intentions?
Absolutely. From what I have experienced of Sebastian, there are many layers to his intentions.
Uh-huh.
After a certain point, I was given promises of him wanting to have children with me
Whoa.
and a lot of empty promises that I think were desperate attempts to keep me around. And when I began a new relationship, I was given the ultimatum where he wanted to take me on a trip to Thailand for, I don't remember if it was 2 weeks or a month. And at first, it was under the premise of friendship. And then when he found out that I was dating somebody new, he told me that the trip would only be happening if I chose to be with him. Suffice it to say, that trip did not happen. But things did happen before that point that informed my decision as well. I'm not sure if you want to get into that quite yet, but that was the final straw.
Yeah, maybe we talk quickly about the labor exploitation before the final straw, because there is one more component of this, of how, as we've seen in other interviews, how he uses people's time and talents for himself to make money to build an empire. Basically, everyone's doing all the work and he's getting all of the glory and the money. So I think it's important to mention how he exploited you in that area.
Absolutely. There's a few different ways in which that happened. In the first time when I was 22, 23, and I was around him, I was working on my bachelor's and minoring in English. I consider myself to be a pretty decent writer. And he asked me if I would be comfortable looking over his draft of one of his books that came out. And I spent, I think, a couple of months working on it, giving him feedback, making minor adjustments. And I was promised at the time, from what I remember, compensation. And after a while being a full-time student, it was too much for me. The constant phone calls were reminding me and giving me flashbacks of the things that I had experienced. And I just didn't feel comfortable having that level of professional involvement with him. And after the fact, I did not get any compensation for my efforts and my time. I'm not sure if the other person that I believe to have also helped ever got recognition or was paid.
Wow, it's so infuriating. Especially, I don't know if he ever used men to the same capacity that he used women, but it seemed like it was a trend to find beautiful women, exploit them in all sorts of ways, and benefit. He was the only one who benefited, really, is what it seems.
I would have to agree with that. I think that people did benefit in their own ways. I'm not sure if financially anyone has benefited all that much, but I saw instances of men involved in and around like Sebastian also getting exploited, perhaps not sexually, but I think there was a sense of subservience that was expected in order to get to a certain level or a certain level of involvement, I would say. And from what I saw, watching the way that he spoke to them was very demanding, at times demeaning, and it hurt my heart to watch them put up with that kind of treatment. So I don't believe that it was just women that he exploited. I think that there's a close circle of people that is kept around him who regularly are subjected to various forms of exploitation.
Oh, that's awful. And it's all under the assumption that he is. Would you say that he's worshipped in some capacity? Because there always has to be something that the leader is claiming for people to want to willingly give over. Obviously, there's manipulation and coercion happening simultaneously, but there has to be some sort of power that he holds over these people aside from just being the face of vampirism. Do you know what that is?
I feel like I could do a whole like 2-hour TED talk on this. But to keep it concise, yes, I think that there's a fan base. There's this idea that he's this powerful person who created this community by himself, and I think that people are at times starstruck. The first involvement to the community, you everyone really gets the red carpet rolled out if they're deemed worthy. I also think that there's this understanding, or in my opinion, facade that he holds so much knowledge, and that it's almost like this gate kept information that you won't be able to receive anywhere else, which, in my opinion, is incorrect. A lot of the information that I digested from reading his books and listening to him are regurgitations of information that is easily accessible elsewhere. But I don't expect people who are being introduced to this community to know that, especially when, it's the first name that pops up
Yeah.
when you are searching for that community.
And wasn't he also promising some sort of eternal salvation's not the right word. I think you know what I'm talking about, though.
Yeah, yeah. So it's difficult because there is this broader vampiric religion that works under the premise of avoiding the second death, if you will, in order to maintain your memories from this lifetime. So in the next one, you can kind of not start with a blank slate. You can keep going. And that's not something unique to him. However, the way that I believe it was communicated by him was that you have to maintain your involvement with that community in order to be powerful enough to do it.
Mm.
And there's exceptions to that rule. A lot of practitioners are solitary and are looking to achieve the same goal. But there's definitely been claims around, from what I heard, that there's an aspect of being the chosen one, if you will, which is pretty consistent with what I understand to be more grandiose behaviors associated with narcissistic traits,
Yeah,
and something that's
definitely.
often seen in spaces of cults and cult
Mhm.
leaders.
Yeah, so let's go back to that final straw moment for you.
The final straw for me was immediately after I had broken it off with somebody who I found horrible things out about, and I was at my lowest point. I was invited to a kink party by Sebastian, and I was working under the premise and communicated that this was something that I wanted to go to see for the first time, and also for purposes of feeding. Again, sex magic is a very powerful tool. I don't personally utilize it in that way, but it's a good place to feed on the energy, the group energy of the space. And this was verbally communicated to him. When we arrived, he used my collar and my sign of submission to assault me publicly.
Oh my gosh.
As a result of my long-lasting trauma and experiences with SA throughout my life, I went into my fawning response, which is the only way that I have learned to cope with those types of scenarios. At this point, he announced to everyone in the community that there would no longer be sexual relationships allowed unless approved by him. I think there was a caveat there, and was kind of acting like it was his idea. Simultaneously, I was aware that my reputation was being picked at by him, that the people around him had different notions of who I was and what I was and why I was there. And so I'm not sure if that was the first time that my reputation had been dismantled by him, um, or if it was the case that it was happening over time and I was just perceived as another plaything that had no other reason to be there, despite over a decade of having my own practice and, in my opinion, being a damn good magical practitioner.
Yeah.
So it was painful on many fronts.
Yeah. I'm so sorry that happened to you, and good for you for standing up to him. It was clearly a threat when you stood in your power and you held those boundaries, and it's just a telltale sign of a cult leader. The second someone becomes threatening, they have to discredit you. They have to slander your name because they don't want anyone to believe anything you have to say. And it's just like adding salt to the wound where they stabbed you in the back. And that's one of the hardest things about leaving a high control group, because I want people to really truly understand that this is a high control group. It's not just a fun group of people playing dress up or something. It's a very serious group controlled by this man who is exploiting everybody in so many different ways that we've already discussed. And when someone tries to leave, they are slandered and threatened, and it's a big deal for someone to speak out. So, what made you decide to come forward, and are you nervous about any repercussions?
I'd been wrestling for a while with coming forward on this. I'm still sitting in a space of feeling a bit more isolated. I am one of Casa's students, so I get that sense of community with her, which is amazing. At the same time, it felt like one voice is just a drop in the ocean. It's going to get lost. I've seen people in the past try to discuss the things that Sebastian has done and hold accountability, and their reputation, their platform gets completely decimated. Seeing Rachel's interview gave me a sense of courage. I guess the best way I can say it is it gave me hope that she could be the catalyst to encourage more of us to come forward. And in speaking with Casa and her willingness to come forward, I felt enough support and camaraderie and safety in my perspective and in knowing that my truth is my truth and nobody can take that away from me. I'm definitely afraid of ramifications, not like my physical safety. I feel like there's always been this almost open-ended, if I ever want to come back, I'm allowed to. I'm wanted back. So this is kind of the final nail in the coffin. And I'm okay with that, but I'm not sure what it's going to mean for my future as an occultist, as a magical practitioner, because it's still something that means the world to me. And I just hope that this is something that can influence future groups and younger people within the community to set a higher standard of how we conduct ourselves in these power hierarchies and in these groups. Because, of course, not every group is like this, but too many are.
Yeah. And that's why we talk about this and we do put out these disclaimers of for any group that we cover, we're not saying every single group is that way, but we want to provide the red flags and provide the awareness around the manipulation tactics so that if you come across it, you can become aware of it. And that's why we say cults to consciousness. Once you become conscious of it, once you have that perspective that something is off, you can make change or you can get out before it's too late. And I love that you are getting your degree to become a therapist and you're in graduate school and you have the language now. So, with that, what are some things that you've been able to look back on and give words to that you couldn't before?
It's such a big question. My healing journey began slightly before I began graduate school. I was lucky enough to be able to go into intensive outpatient program that addresses complex trauma from a holistic lens. And that inspired me to get my education in this so I can help others who have gone through similar struggles. It's been a very in-depth experience of finding terminology to understand what happened to me and try to understand people who engage in these behaviors as a whole. Um, Having an actual clinical lens to address narcissistic traits, understand from a behavioral perspective, a developmental perspective, how this kind of develops has helped me simultaneously have space for empathy and also teach me what to look out for. In terms of complex trauma, understanding how normal the experience is of questioning your reality, of taking years to come to terms with what happened, has really given me the space for self compassion and empathy for others who, again, from the outside, people can easily say, well, why didn't you just get out? Like, this sounds crazy. But when you fully understand the inner workings of somebody who is actively going through repeated exposure to trauma, I think a lot of people would hold more empathy and be able to recognize that maybe basing things on their own experience is not an adequate baseline for understanding.
Mhm. I agree.
I think that it's so interesting because, again, going back to narcissistic abuse, there's so many layers to it. There's people who are more presenting super overt. It's You can spot it on the street, and then there are more covert presentations and methods that make it more difficult, make you question your reality, not knowing what's up and what's down, and why so many people stay and what the bystander effect even is and why it happens so frequently in these spaces.
I agree with all of that. It's so empowering to discover language that can fit your specific situation. And I agree with if you haven't been in a situation that has completely turned your world upside down, it's so hard to understand the situation of someone who has. And that's why, again, we just try to bring awareness to these subjects so people can try and be more compassionate for things that are just incomprehensible to somebody. And why I'm so passionate about having people come on and share their stories, using my own limited experience to try and relate and and also hold compassion and a safe space for those to share, because I do get it in so many different ways across so many different culty experiences, unfortunately. But yes, look at us. We've come so far. So how are you doing now? What brings you joy and peace and happiness?
Now I'm doing really well. I of course have all kinds of various things going on in my life that kind of contribute to stress, but much better now that I'm in grad school. I have a clear direction of my future. I have a huge passion for getting out into nature, for connecting with the earth and connecting with people who uplift me, which is something that I feel like I did not have before. I still very much practice magic, practice the occult through a lens that aligns with my own morality. And I think that that's something that brings me immense fulfillment. And I've taken a little bit of a hiatus from writing, but I'm hoping to get more into that again. It brings me so much happiness to get my thoughts onto paper. And I'm excited and looking forward to helping more people who have dealt with similar experiences. I feel like I'm at this point in my life really in alignment with my sense of purpose and who I am in my identity, and I'm proud of the person that I am today.
Yeah, I love that. And just like I tell everybody on this show, whatever is your consciousness side of things, for some people it's Christianity, for some people it's atheism or agnosticism, for you it's the occult and your own personal practice. And I think that that's great as long as no one's controlling you and you're not harming anybody else. I think more power to you. Find your peace, find your authenticity. So, love that so much. Is there anything that you wanted to cover that we haven't already?
Nope, I think that we covered a lot of bases, and I think that I've said the most salient points of what I intended to bring to this interview.
Great. How can people find and support you? What are your handles?
So you can find me on Instagram on my occultist page. My username is my first name, Ashra, Ashra, and it's Duvide, Ashra Duvid. And yeah, my inbox is open to anyone who wants to share their perspectives, learn more about occultist practice, and yeah, I will drop the link to my Instagram below.
Amazing. Oh, we need your little listen moment.
Linda, listen to those enabling Sebastian, whether it is financial gain, a sense of community, or other motivations that keep you in Sebastian's orbit. It is not worth the cost of self abandonment or the cost of knowing what is right from wrong and looking the other way. No matter what, please remember that the magic is within you. Nobody can take that away. He does not give you your power, you do.
I love it. Great job. Very thoughtful and pointed and perfect. So, this has been so great. Thank you so much for being brave and coming on and sharing with us. It means so much to us, and I'm sure people listening, and maybe it will inspire others to come forward too. Do you have any other final thoughts before we go?
No other final thoughts. Thank you so much for having me on, and I hope that more people will feel safe to come forward and speak on their experience. We're each just one drop in the water, but we together are more powerful than he will ever be. So don't be afraid.
I feel like together you're a thunderstorm. More powerful than rain. You're bringing the thunder, the crackdown.
That's the goal.
Uh, Yes, so good. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave those words of encouragement down below. It does mean so much to our guests, and we have such an incredible community who leaves the most thoughtful comments, and I feel so grateful for you guys. It's the best way to support the podcast, interacting in any way, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing. If you like this video, you're definitely going to want to check out our other 2 videos with Rachel and Casa. They were both incredible, unique perspectives on the vampire community within Sebastian's vampire community. And if you want to support the podcast further, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/cults to consciousness. We have some merch at cultstoconsciousness.com. We're going to Mexico at the end of October. You have a couple weeks, maybe even a week now left to book if you want to come. All the links are in the description. And if you like this video, as I mentioned, go check out our other vampire videos. We'll probably list them below here. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.